Russia breaking news. Finland presidential candidate. Russia war is close. Today, voters in the newest NATO member state will choose their next president from a broad field that is united in their belief that a swift and determined response is necessary in the face of the Russian danger that threatens northeastern Europe. The first round of voting for Finland's president has begun, and two candidates are currently in the lead: Alexander Stubb, a former prime minister of the center-right National Coalition Party, and Pekka Haavisto, an independent, who was foreign minister. The first round of voting will conclude on Sunday, and a runoff election will be held on February 11 if no candidate receives 50% of the vote. The head of state of Finland is responsible for the country's foreign and security policy, its representation in NATO, and the leadership of the Finnish Defence Forces. President Sauli Niinistö will step down as the next leader. During his 12 years in government, Niinistö has guided Finland's transition from a neutral position leaning toward the West to full membership in NATO, during which time the country has played an essential diplomatic role in bridging the gap between the Western blocs and Russia. Before the first round of voting, Haavisto told Newsweek that people along NATO's eastern frontier are close to being caught in Moscow's battle with Ukraine. Haavisto is Finland's foreign minister and signed the country's NATO application. Because of our history, because of our big neighbor, and because of our long border, people are aware of all kinds of security risks, even throughout the very peaceful years, Haavisto stated in a private conversation that Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 caused a historic realignment of security for the Finns and nearby Swedes, despite the fact that NATO's newest member has a formidable military of its own. Since last April, Helsinki has been a part of the alliance. Stockholm will follow soon after. It's very important that NATO is ready and focused to react if any kind of threat towards Finland or Sweden, added Haavisto. Over time, the Russian public's stance on the war would progressively shift. But we must be patient since it will not happen overnight. This is Haavisto's third attempt at running for president. In 2012 and 2018, he came in second to Niinistö. Haavisto is 65 years old. Among the male contenders vying for a spot in next month's runoff election, Haavisto, who was first elected to parliament in 1985, is currently polling second, just behind competitor Stubb. Haavisto commented, "So far, the opinion polls have been fine," before pointing out that concerns about national security have been front and center since the beginning of the nomination process. "I visited Lapland, Ivalo, and one guy said to me that his house is 50 kilometers, 31 miles, from the border and asked if he should sell," according to the candidate. "We are retaining the border where it is. I said, wow, don't sell." The worries that people may have are mirrored here, though. Candidates on NATO's front line have largely agreed on 3 points: increasing participation in NATO, maintaining assistance for Ukraine, and preventing Russia from acting aggressively in the future. According to Stubb's 2022 interview with Newsweek, the measured national security debate has been carried out with what he called a Finnish approach, meaning cool, calm, and collected but determined. Many have speculated that Finland's recent membership in NATO could lead to the deployment of foreign troops or possibly nuclear weapons on its soil. The United States will be able to access 15 stations, including 5 in the high north near Russia, and store equipment and weapons on Finnish land thanks to a Defense Cooperation Agreement, DCA, signed in December between Washington, D.C., and Helsinki. The DCA will suffice for the time being, according to Haavisto. "It's very widely supported," he remarked about the agreement. Of course, people are eager to learn what kind of storage it is, how much U.S. activity around that storage, according to him. However, we have previously stated that the primary objective is data storage, and that the actual involvement of the United States and NATO will be during drills, are not requesting anything akin to a permanent NATO presence. "We believe our military can handle the day-to-day operations in Finland at this time." Haavisto stated that the topic of nuclear weapons would not be pertinent unless there was a substantial change in NATO doctrine. "Somewhere in the future, something like this might happen, but my answer has been that nobody has asked to store nuclear weapons, and we have not asked to store nuclear weapons in Finland," stated the president. the Finns have always been on edge as they stared over the 835-mile border that they share with Russia. As a result of the increasingly widespread approach employed by Russia and its ally Belarus to undermine NATO border nations, Helsinki has responded to migrant flows orchestrated by Russia by sealing off that border. Russia is behind this, Haavisto claimed. No matter what happens, we must remain resilient and maintain the border closure for the duration necessary. We're unable to stop it, which is a shame. It's focused on us. One Nordic country that has yet to join NATO is Sweden. This week, the leaders of Hungary and Turkey finally abandoned their long-standing objections, making its admission look inevitable. I could imagine that also the Baltic states feel more secure, he added, mentioning that control over the so-called NATO lake, as some officials have cheekily renamed the Baltic Sea, could be crucial in the event of a future confrontation with Russia. This is especially true if Moscow's forces attempt to cut the narrow Suwalki Gap, which links NATO's Eastern European states to the Baltic states. The prospect that President Vladimir Putin, emboldened by Russia's war economy and free from his destructive war in Ukraine, may seek support from NATO is a growing worry for Western leaders. My analysis is still that the threshold of attacking NATO countries by the Russians remains quite high because of the deterrence, because of the response that NATO could offer, said Haavisto. Things may change so rapidly, as recent events have shown. Unidentified saboteurs severed the Russian-German Nord Stream natural gas pipelines in September 2022. The Baltic Connector gas pipeline, which connects Finland and Estonia, was damaged in October 2023 by a Chinese ship. Also, the migratory flows armed with weapons, the frequent overflights, and the suspected Russian GPS involvement have not ended. The continuous fight for coastal Finns was made evident by the recent drone strikes by Ukraine on the US Teluga terminal near St. Petersburg, which is located on the southern shore of the Gulf of Finland. The conflict is closer to us, Haavisto stated. And of course, the recent events on the southern side of the Gulf of Finland, the chemical storages and burning of those, it just shows how close the war is also to our region. For comment, Newsweek emailed the Russian Foreign Ministry, struggle in Ukraine. As the conflict in Ukraine has continued for nearly 2 years, Finns have been among the country's most vocal backers. The Finnish hardware that Kyiv is using includes tanks, artillery pieces, and a lot of ammunition. Haavisto warned Newsweek in October 2022 that the West should brace themselves for a protracted conflict. Even after 15 months, he claimed, there is still no sign of peace. Europe was never prepared for such a long war, Haavisto stated. For our own protection and in light of the situation in Ukraine, we must immediately begin producing military hardware. This broader view needs to be considered, he continued by saying that the defense industrial base in Europe has been painfully slow to rise to the challenge, and that EU capitals are dealing with politicians that are reluctant to fully back Ukraine. It seems that neither Moscow nor Kyiv is prepared to negotiate. Prisoner swaps and the success of initiatives like the Black Sea Grain Initiative demonstrate that it is not impossible to strike an agreement to cease the conflict, according to Haavisto. Even in this worst-case situation, some contact remains, he commented. And you always can be hopeful that, for example, countries like China or others could use their power towards Russia in this. According to Haavisto, Russia is heading towards disaster. The Russian economy, in the long run, is weakening. No innovations, no new technologies, no high technologies, warned Putin. It very much reflects the time of the Cold War, when Russia was lagging behind in its economic development because of the Iron Curtain and isolation, according to him. If Russia were to become economically isolated, it would suffer. The Russian people will experience this in their daily lives. But it's a long way off. After 2023 saw little to no progress in reclaiming land, General Valery Zaluzhnyi, commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian military, declared a stalemate along the 600-mile front. The possibility of negotiations and Ukrainian concessions to end the war has been revived by such discourse. A negotiated settlement that benefits Ukraine would be my first choice, Haavisto stated. But this is something I would totally leave to the Ukrainians. What are the conditions and so on? Since we are Westerners, It is our duty to back Ukraine in all negotiations so that they may negotiate from a position of strength. I would be hesitant to say anything more than that. Meanwhile, it seems like people are getting their hopes up that Putin will be ousted either by a popular revolution or a coup d'état in the palace. A brief revolt in the Wagner Group in June showcased that maybe everything was not so stable, according to Havisto. Indeed, there is resistance, he chimed in.